Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everyone into Garden of Doom, and this week we are talking with Miguel Conner, who I want to first of all thank David Parry, the Dr. Reverend, actually I believe it's the Reverend Dr. David Parry. It always confuses me which honorific is first, but I believe it is the Reverend part that comes first, for introducing us. And today's topic is going to be something that we've touched on times before, but never in detail, and that is the Gnostics. What is Gnosticism? Who are the Gnostics, or who were the Gnostics? I guess who are the Gnostics is a question as well. There always are. There's still people doing the cult of Isis after all. And sort of the mythology that I stumbled upon in this Garden of Doom world, and then started seeing the words in other places as well. So we'll get into that a little bit as we go on. But the guest today is Miguel Conner. Thank you very much for joining us.
Glad to be here, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for doing it. I guess first things first, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself?
Oh, there's not much to say. I am a seeker, a spiritual hitchhiker, as I often like to say, and found myself very interested in the Gnostics, that ancient way of inner knowing, as Stephen Heller called it, many years ago, and it seemed to just fit my worldview or what I needed. And now for, God, I don't even want to know how long, I think we're going on 15 years, I have been studying and expressing Gnosticism in various mediums, books, podcasts, videos, and all that. So I think I'm a writer and freelance marketer and just general madman across the waters, as I like to say.
Well, there you go. I mean, isn't that what we all sort of are? So I've seen your show twice. And it was the same show, because David sent it to me. And the first time was, of course, tied to the Nephilim Anthropology Conference, which I am somewhat affiliated with. And so you all were talking about Nephilim and giants. And it never fails to surprise me just how smart and flexible David is with his tolerance of things. There's only a couple things I could say about him that are rigidly for sure. One is he's an absolute consistent pacifist. Two, he seems to always be angry at the English government for reasons unknown to me. Yes, I don't really get involved in other countries' politics, except when I do. Of course, we all break our own rules. And third, he's always got a million projects going on without fail. Beyond that, when he first told me what church he was involved with, I didn't really know what any of those words meant. I mean, I knew what Catholic meant, but I knew what Old Apostolic meant separately. I didn't really know what Gnostic. I had no idea what Valentinus meant. I thought it was maybe tied to Saint Valentine, from Saint Valentine's Day, but I pretended. And he's been very kind and generous. But so I saw the show on the film, and then he sent me this show again. I'm like, this show's got to be on Gnosticism. And no, it was the same show on the film again. So it took me about 45 minutes to go thinking, I think I've seen the show before to realize I absolutely saw it. So luckily enough, that's probably the most babbling I'm going to do this episode, because I only know very loosely who the Gnostics were and if they are, and I know enough to be a little bit dangerous. I mean, I know what Gnosticism is. It's seeking wisdom, seeking of knowledge. But I guess that's what you're here for. Who were the Gnostics? When was the group started? When did it become a group versus just a line of thought? And then, like all groups singular, they become groups plural.
Oh boy. I don't think, we only have a certain amount of time. I guess all your questions have to be reframed because you're asking the wrong questions.
That's fine. Reframe them.
I think, as scholars have noted, the Gnostics at their core are shamanistic. They were the ones who took over or got handed the baton along with the Hermeticists. I think the best theory I have is they were probably originally dissatisfied Jews, probably pagans, dissatisfied with the Roman Empire, the corrupt Second Temple, the priesthood, dissatisfied with reality itself, you could say. And in the city of Alexandria, Egypt, they began to mingle with these priests who still had the skill or the secrets of the Egyptian mysteries, because in Greco-Roman times, that was starting to go by the wayside. There were other state religions. The Romans were good at outlawing anything that was too magical or threatening. So this got handed to them, and the ancient mysteries, whether it's Egyptian, Eleusinian, doesn't matter, of course, is shamanistic. It is about satisfying your sense for inner knowing. It's about having an experience. It is about making contact with the other worlds or higher worlds or a higher form of consciousness. And that's what shamanism did, right? The shaman's job was to go out into the spirit world, negotiate evil and good spirits, and bring back medicine. Because these mysteries, of course, were about healing, psychological healing, physical healing. So the Gnostics were shamanistic, and as you probably know, shamanism is not really a religion. There's no church of shamanism. It is more of a spiritual modality that gets attached to other religions. That's why there is Mongolian shamanism, Japanese shamanism, Inca shamanism, etc., etc. So that's what has confounded scholars for many years, is how come the Gnostics appear in different religions? Some on the right think it's a polemic, say that it is parasitical. It's like a virus that kills religions. Yeah, whatever. Okay, that's not a bad thing, but it's more of a modality that, or a physical or metaphysical orientation that sticks to different religions. That's why you have Christian Gnosticism, pagan Gnosticism, Judaism, you call it Kabbalah. In Islam, you may call it Sufism or the Assassins, the Assassin's Creed. Persian, you may call it Mazdakianism, and so forth. And this, again, is how it came. And of course, like David's a good anarchist. The Gnostics were certainly anarchists. So they pretty much split up into little groups, or you might say little fraternities, just like the Freemasons and others, that spread out, attach itself to these different religions. And the goal, again, was the same as the mysteries. It was about understanding who you were. It was about exploring the spiritual worlds for secrets. And it was about making contact with higher alien worlds. Now, the Gnostics, different than the mysteries or even shamanism, or you might say they supercharged it. They gave it some Red Bull, is that the Gnostics said that this world is a simulation. And not only is this world a simulation, we are trapped in the simulation. We are trapped by some higher agents that have put us here. Now, they had different varying opinions on, well, who has trapped us here? Were bad guys, assholes? I hope I can swear in your show.
You can.
Not, I apologize to your audience. But did these beings trap us, or was it for our benefit? Or did we trap ourselves and we forgot? We are simply avatars of this higher self, and we forgot we're in this little simulation. And the Gnostics believed, unlike the shamans, that you had to take these astral flights through these various choreographed and complex rituals and find out the truth about our simulation, and also overcome these beings that had trapped us, whether these beings were beneficial or malevolent, because these beings were in control of our reality, they were in control of fate. Sometimes they were in control of our very thoughts. They were like mind parasites, very Colin Wilson. And the goal was to make contact, and the Gnostics usually call this, at least for the Christian and pagan Gnostics, they called it gnosis, which is experiential knowledge of something higher than yourself, as well as a fierce understanding of this false reality, as well as understanding of our true selves, which do not belong here but belong beyond the stars. So that's a very simple summary, but I think it works.
I think so too. I think that was brilliant. Very good. And this is probably what we're in the first couple hundred years of what we call Common Era.
Yeah. Well, again, it's sort of that's the wrong question, because they were getting these ancient Egyptian mysteries. So it's like it was new, but it wasn't, because they were handed something that was thousands of years old. But of course, they were within a certain culture,
right?
A cultural matrix, so they adapted things. In other words, you're no longer talking about Osiris, but we're going to talk about this guy named Jesus, or Hermes Trismegistus, or Mary Magdalene. So there were, of course, this, as far as scholars say, first century would be the time. But again, I think it's much older. There's evidence that is before the times of Christ. And but around the 2nd century is when it really became Gnosticism. I don't want to say weaponized, but it started to become a threat to the powers that be and started getting noticed. Church fathers started writing volumes about how dangerous and insane and paranoid and narcissistic these Gnostics were, and they were a threat. Eventually, of course, the Gnostics were exterminated as Rome leaned more and more into Christianity, but they were exterminated across time in Muslim empires, Chinese empires, Christian empires in the West, and so forth. And the Gnostics have other features, of course. I just gave you a small cornerstones. I mean, for example, they wanted to resuscitate the divine feminine that had been lost. I think a lot of these original Gnostics were not just the Egyptian mysteries, but also the mysteries of Asherah from Hebrew times before the cult of Yahweh took over. So they wanted to resurrect these ancient goddesses, and Asherah, of course, is cognate with Ishtar and Ashtari. These goddesses that had sort of lost their luster in Greco-Roman times, and they wanted to resuscitate that. And of course, they had other things. They were huge deconstructionists. They were very much into metaphor and mythology, believed in reincarnation. Many were vegetarian and so forth. But again, they varied in their rituals. But again, it's all about, where can I go? Where can I attach myself for this altered state of consciousness to break through the simulation and make contact with this, as they called it, alien god?
Okay, so I understand that me trying to label it is basically a bit of a mistake, because these are much older thoughts, and they get names put on them just framed upon the circumstances or the communities that they were in at those times, or maybe later on. But that this goes back thousands upon thousands of years. Who knows? They could be the original, mythology or philosophy of, our ancient, when men first became, more men than ape. In any event, that is unknowable anyway at this point in time. So at some point, one group, they looked, I guess they were reading the Old Testament, which probably wasn't called the Old Testament just yet. And they're reading going, wow, that God, he seems like a bit of a dick. That can't be right. He's got his chosen people. They're going through hell. He's a total jack off to this guy, Job. He's killing a lot of people. He's killing Egyptians. He's killing Canaanites. He's even killing their animals. Or is he going after giants? Is it just because he's mad about adultery, but idolatry? And putting other gods before him. And he's a bit draconian. And then this new God, this new Jesus, he's a little gentler. He's more about turning the other cheek and love thy brother and all of that stuff. And well, is that really his dad? And is it really a spirit? They're the same guy? And they came up with something where they're like, well, no. The God of the Old Testament, the 5 books of Moses, the Septuagint, whatever terminology was used then, isn't really the father of Jesus. He's not the real God. He is a godlike creature, but a lesser god called the Demiurge. They didn't quite say the devil, though I'm not sure if that's what they meant or didn't mean. I don't know. And then there's this whole mythology where there's this level of what I'll call demons, but since they serve the Demiurge, I guess they would just be angels anyway, and they're like demons of a lesser god. And I guess maybe the Israelites were children of a lesser god. And they're called Archons, which anybody who knows Lovecraft, recognizes the word Archons from there, and probably 100 other places as well. Who was this group, and what is? I'm going to call it mythology. I don't know a better word to use for it. There probably is one. I don't know if cosmology is a better word. I'm not sure if.
And call it reality.
Call it reality. That's fine. Whatever it is, as long as we agree on the language. So. What is this, and what's the story? How much of it did I get right? How much did I get wrong? Or more importantly, what's the real story of that?
Yeah, I think you got it right. I would say they focus more on Genesis. There was a guy named Marcion in the 2nd century who rejected the Hebrew Bible and said what you said, and he thought Christianity should just be completely separate from Judaism. But the Gnostics really thought that it wasn't so much that Genesis was false as that it had been misinterpreted. There was a secret story in Genesis that gave new vistas to what the world was. And it's not that controversial. If you read Galatians, if you read Paul through a different lens, he's talking Gnosticism. And when he's talking about the God of this world and the powers and principalities, and he's talking, when he says the rulers of this world, he's saying the Archons of this world. He's not talking about the Romans. Archon means ruler, but he's talking about that spiritual wickedness in high places that he says. These beings that have taken over the universe, and this being called Jesus can break their bonds. So, and Paul even says when Moses brought down the Torah, he had a veil. Angels brought down the Torah, not God, according to Paul. And he had a veil over his eyes. So a lie, the grift was on, if you would. And so these false religions and gods would be worshipped. And so, the Gnostics simply felt that the ruler of this universe, as Philip K. Dick, was demented. And he was the supreme being. In some Gnostic texts, he is the abortion or child of Sophia, which is the Gnostic goddess. But he's just gone cray-cray with the management's not very good, if you know what I mean. They're more like bros than they are adult managers. So the Demiurge and his Archons, his underlings, they are just making a mess of the universe, even though they're in charge of fate and everything else. And to the Gnostics, it was, well, why are we here? Okay, what the hell's wrong? I mean, are they sadists? Well, yes, but it's different. The Demiurge stole some of the energy from his mother Sophia in some myths, and he just stole it from a higher realm or a cosmic cataclysm. And he needs these what the Gnostics call divine sparks to sustain his universe, to give it shape. And who are these divine sparks? You and me, and the animals in some Gnostic stories.
So it's sort of a version of the Anunnaki, right? It's a little bit like...
Well, that's what I'm going to get to. The Gnostics weren't just pulling stuff out of their ass. They were coming from very, very primordial mythology. So yes, you could easily, and I mean easily, change Demiurge for the Anunnaki and the Archons. You could change it for the Titans. You could change it for the Watchers and the Nephilim. I even interviewed this lady called Jamita. He says the Incas and Bolivian natives have the same myth. There's this myth about these sort of cosmic engineers come here, they create us, make us their slaves and drain and feed off of us, or they make us work, and then they just take advantage. And our best chance, whether it's in the Greek myths, the Gnostic myths, or the Jewish myths, is to wake up and either escape or overthrow them. I mean, if you want to know what the first, I said the Matrix, right? The Matrix is, of course, a retelling, but instead of a divine spark, they're feeding off of the electricity in our brain. They just switched it around. But the first ever Matrix, or the primordial Gnostic myth, is something called Plato's Cave. You know, Plato's Cave. We're trapped in a cave. Somebody is putting shadows on the wall, and we think it's the real thing. And then somebody escapes, goes out, looks at the sunlight, and says, "Oh, this is reality," and he comes back to warn us. That's a very Gnostic myth. Of course, some people have said there might have been a longer version that got lost because, you know, Plato really, that's about all he says, but there might have, so you have that. And then what's another primordial Gnostic myth? The myth of Prometheus. Prometheus is instructed by Zeus to make humanity, why? To be the slaves of Olympus. What does Prometheus do? Well, he goes with Athena. Again, wisdom Sophia. He goes up to Olympus and he steals the fire from the gods, and he comes down. You can equate the fire with knowledge, gnosis, or maybe light. And that way humanity wakes up, and according to the prophecies, eventually we will overthrow Zeus, the Demiurge. And the Gnostics talk, it wasn't just the God of the Hebrew Bible. They said plenty of bad things about Saturn, Kronos, Osiris. You know, anybody in the managerial level of this universe got a bad rap. And they talk about the Nephilim and everything. So yeah. So this is it's a very widespread myth. Again, Paul knew about it. Jesus quotes the book of Enoch, the Gnostics. I mean, all the ancients knew about it, and somehow it's been sort of, it's been suppressed, and that's no surprise.
Or has it? I mean, like you said, it was the Matrix, and it's sort of all around us. But it's almost like when something's all around you, you know, when everything's extraordinary, nothing's extraordinary. Everything, you know, you become numb to anything. You know, the homicide detective syndrome. But you said that the choices are to wake up or to overthrow it. You know, I don't know exactly what encompasses wake up, and I don't know how you overthrow. These beings have held you sort of in check for, well, you know, 2,000 to 8,000 years or more. So are there any thoughts on that? I'm not, you know, yours or other people's, you know, either now or throughout history?
Yeah, well, I mean, overthrow them. Yeah, don't stand up and go into rebellion. What did Nietzsche say? Fight ye monsters unless you become a monster. Philip K. Dick famously said the empire never ended. To fight the empires to become infected by its derangement. Fortunately, humans haven't learned that in thousands of years. But it was Professor Clark Emery who said, he's a professor, I believe, of Buddhism, who equated the Gnostics with Buddhism. Very similar traditions, almost, it's like they're cousins. Wouldn't be surprised if there was some original font with these two traditions. But he said, the awakening of an individual is a cosmic event. So I think that's our job, to overthrow the Archons, is to awaken. If we can remember who we were, Plato said all learning is remembering. Remember that we come from somewhere amazing, that this divine spark within us is greater than anything Olympus or the Archons or the Anunnaki can conceive of. then we can overthrow them, because they can't handle our freedom. And once we are free, they can no longer use us or affect us. So that's how it is. And that's how history is. Look at awakened beings, whether it's Buddha or Jesus, or a handful of them can change history. Let's put it that way. Think of 20% of the human population woke up, what we could do. We could overthrow the Archons, and as I call them, they're butt slaves in the establishment. They're representatives down here on Earth. As above, so below, said Hermes.
We are in an era where there's lots of people saying, wake up. And that's fine and good, and that sounds like it's well, basically what you are talking about. However, there's no unanimity or even close to consensus on what they're saying, wake up to do what or wake up from what. Instead of it being an evil, they've sort of otherized someone. Now, a lot of these end up in some form of anti-Semitism, or some of them end up in some form of other sort of, elites and, or whatever it is. How do you know which is the right wake-up call and how to heed it? How do you listen to Gabriel's horn the correct way?
Well, I think first it starts with a little bit of honesty. First, we have to admit that we are complete frauds. That what we think we are constructs programmed by our religious institutions, our culture, our parents, and forces from high above. So it's the old Alcoholics Anonymous. Half of the battle is to admit that you're an alcoholic. And I think when we get that honesty, we realize we are completely addicted to the material world. And again, most of what we are is a complete fraud. So then you go, well, what do I do? Well, you got to know thyself. Again, the Gnostics were not pulling stuff out of their ass. The temple of Apollo at Delphi, what's the most famous maxim there? Know thyself. I mean, that was it. And Apollo, as scholars have noticed, was originally a shamanistic god as well. So who are you? Well, now it comes the hard part, because in Gnosticism, it first starts with everybody's an individual, so there's no one size fits all. And that always frustrates people, because we all want a list, right? Tell me 10 things to do so I can be saved, or can you give me exactly how long I need to meditate, or something like that. It's like, no, you have to find out what your avenues of self-knowledge and wholeness are. Somebody that I, of course, have benefited a lot was Carl Jung, who himself, the foundation of his ideas is Gnosticism. And he always said, the most important thing is to take that inner journey, to find out that you have a soul. When you find out, you take that inner journey, whatever tools you use, ceremonial magic, meditation, yoga, psychedelic, doesn't matter. That's your job. You're going to find out first, you're going to feel a sense of wholeness. You're going to feel a sense of healing from not just your personal trauma, but the cosmic trauma that we're in. The trauma of your ancestors will be healed. And you will feel a sense of purpose. You will know what your place in this universe is, and it may be a small role, it may be a heroic role, but you will go through that with a complete sense of liberation and purpose. And it's different for everybody. I always like this saying, what's the meaning of life? To find your gift. What do you do with your gift? You give it away. It's the purpose of life is to give away your gift. Again, I'm going back to Alcoholics Anonymous. It ain't sobriety unless you give it away. So because we humans, when it comes down to it, our superpower is our empathy and our ability to work as a team. That's what frustrated Zeus. He made sure that we were not created with claws and wings, and we couldn't swim underwater. So with Prometheus, our superpower is our ability to be creative and to unite together for a common purpose, which betters the tribe. And any conscious being knows what's good for the tribe and what isn't good for the tribe. It's not rocket science, if you would, but you will find purpose, and I think that's it. I mean, I can't think of anything else.
Okay. So if the Demiurge is sort of the equivalent of basically any king of the gods in pretty much any pantheon you can think of, would the Archons then be the equivalent of the Olympians or the angels or archangels or, well, yeah, I think that question is clear enough. I don't need to do a laundry list of different mythologies.
Yeah, I mean, you always have the bad guy, the architect or Thanos, and then you've got the underlings who do his bidding. Some Gnostics, some scholars think that there was never any Archons. It's all the Demiurge. They're aspects of the Demiurge. Remember in the Matrix that the agents can pop out of any human being they want?
You bet.
The Demiurge can pop out of any Archon or angel or daemon that he feels like it. That's he's the ultimate micromanager narcissist, and in a way he's us. He's our egos out of control. So we are little pieces of the Demiurge, just as we are little pieces of the divine spark of Sophia.
Yeah, I mean, this is, everything's related, but this is my problem with people saying that there's monotheistic religions. I don't think there are. I mean, you got a god, but he's got immortal minions and immortal enemies. How is that monotheistic? If you have one all-powerful god, there's no demiurge that can thwart him. There's no archons that can thwart him. There's no devil. All the rationalization is he gave us free will to overcome and make the right choice. No, that's not what all powerful means. No, stop. So I don't know, but that's just me. I mean, I guess speaking on behalf of all Gnostics or people who know Gnostics, which side would you fall on in my little argument between Jeff on the left and Jeff on the right?
Jeff on the left and Jeff on the right.
I'm Jeff. So just arguing both sides of the same thing.
Oh, I mean, again, I'm an anarchist, so I don't play the game.
Okay.
I am done. And I think the Gnostics were certainly anarchists. They were apolitical. They certainly complained that there was too much poverty and there needed to be more social justice for the poor. Plotinus laughed at them. So they certainly did not want to see injustice, but at the same time, they were not going to play the Roman game. So I would say, yeah.
How do anarchists act in a way that benefits the tribe? I mean, my view of anarchy, which is, is Lord of the Flies. Maybe I've got it all wrong. Punk rock Lord of the Flies. The biggest guy clubs you on the head, and the smaller guys who want to feel important follow the big guy, and everything starts all over again. What have I got wrong?
There's a story that this actually did happen, and what happened is the opposite of Lord of the Flies. The kids did work together to survive because it's more logical, right?
You'd think.
If we work together at once, we survive. That's what makes us human. If we start playing political games and polarities, that's why we'll be exterminated. Notice we're getting close to extermination today because we're still playing that left-right game. I mean, humanity is eroding. Our culture is vanishing here in the West because we are trapped in these dualities. I mean, and I agree with Jung. And the Gnostics, eventually, you have to bring these two polarities together and find the middle road and go from a place of wholeness. It's simple, but you first start by not playing the game. I mean, John Lennon, that song, The Wheel, that's what he was saying. I've been playing this game. I'm done. I'm going to take care of my son. I'm no longer a rock star or an activist. I'm out of here. So, well, it didn't go very well for him, but he did have the right attitude.
Are there any tales that go are there any corresponding myths other than just the story? Is there something where Archon Michael came down and smote such and such, or are there is there a Archon or Demiurge equivalent of smiting a dragon, or is the Demiurge the dragon?
It's varied. I mean, that's a continuing one because it wasn't in a vacuum. If you read Plato, and Plato, of course, was the big religious figure, they also took a lot from Zoroaster. But again, Plato and Zoroaster were like the Beatles and Elvis back then. Everybody was influenced by these two cats. And Elvis in the Timaeus talks about the Demiurge. He says, but Plato puts him as a good figure. He said, you've got the one, you've got all this chaos. The Demiurge is this God that organizes the universe, and to Plato is a good universe. But then Plato says the Demiurge kind of went up, and he gave the reins to Zeus and others, and that's when imperfection came into the world. But they did have a lot of myths. There's like, for example, a beautiful one which I get from Egyptian lore, where there is nothing, and this snake comes out and becomes self-aware. The Egyptians called the snake Atum, but the Gnostics just called him the primordial snake, and this snake started giving life, and he came up with ideas of itself and emanations. And you have a lot of these. It's almost very Hindu, where you've got a supreme consciousness that suddenly is stirring, and it goes, who am I? And as soon as it says who am I, it creates a duality. And in Hinduism, the duality is Shiva and Shakti, or Prakriti, because there's the consciousness and what's experiencing the consciousness, and it's usually a female. And the Gnostics did the same. There's a consciousness, and then this female force called Barbelo comes out. And every time you ask a question, a capacity of itself becomes a personification. And the Gnostics call this the aeons. And suddenly God is this giant mind. And it's a really beautiful myth. And it's a watery light and this choir that's beyond time and space, or a different type of time and space. But in a lot of the Gnostics things, that's the problem, is that God says, I am wise. And suddenly this being called Sophia comes up. And in the Gnostic myths, the Sophia rebels against the natural order, because that was a prevalent myth in those times. I mean, you had the myth of the goddess going underground or into the underworld, like Inanna, who are some other ones. Isis goes on an adventure. It was a very prevalent myth in those days. And also a goddess that would rebel. You've got Kybele, originally was a male, and she decided she wanted to rebel against heaven. Usually probably curiosity, so she castrates herself and comes down into this universe as a female. So the Gnostics saw that there was this divine, the Shekinah in Judaism. And of course you see in the Hebrew Bible, there is a figure called, in books like Proverbs, there's a figure that's called Wisdom, and she was there in the beginning of time, but men have rejected her. The book of Enoch even says, wisdom came down to men, and the men rejected her, and now she sits on a cloud. So they were taking of this myth of this divine feminine that either had fallen into the world or had rebelled, whatever the reason, and now was here on this planet. But to the Gnostics, as being Sophia, when she came into those worlds, she was so distressed and alone that either through her sorrow, for some reason, she gives birth to her child, the Demiurge, and he takes over her power and starts messing things around. So there's this cosmic drama of Sophia versus the Demiurge. And then later on, you've got the Cathar myth, the Manichaean myth. The Cathar myth is a great one. It's like you've got in the Middle Ages. The Cathars were very Gnostic, in case your audience doesn't know, but in their myth, there's a war in heaven. Satan gets his ass kicked, and but then he says, "Hey, God, I'm sorry. I won't cheat on you again. No, wait, I won't do it again." And God goes, "All right, I'll give you another chance. Get out of here." So Satan goes with his angels across the void, and he runs into this thing called matter. And Satan goes, "Oh my God, this is like Plato. This is like, So he starts fashioning the world, and he uses the energy from some of the angels. He double crosses the angels and puts them into humans, and we are humans that have angel souls trapped, so that Satan can rule this kingdom. And then God goes, "Oh my God, he's screwing things up once again. So I'm going to send a part of me to rectify the problem, and that part of me is called Jesus, and Jesus's responsibility is to wake people up." That's the difference between, throughout history, the Jesus of the Gnostics, whether it's the Cathar, the ancient Gnostics, he's not there to save you from sin, or he's not there to do some redemptive death. He's there to wake you up, to kick you in the rear and said, "Wake up, take the red pill." So that's what happens. And then the Manichaeans had more. It was more Zoroastrian. There was once a kingdom of light and darkness, and they got into a war, and they mixed up, and they fell into the world. So we are a mixture of light and darkness, and the light of us has to go back so that the two kingdoms separate, which they got from the Greeks. The Greeks have a myth like that too, where the Titans are eating Dionysus, and Zeus throws a thunderbolt and kills him, but then Dionysus and the Titans get mixed up here into the world, and this is our universe is a mixture of Titan and Dionysus. So our job is to separate our Dionysus side from our Titan side. So yeah, they had lots of myths, and then I can get into Simon Magus, Mary Mag. They had a lot. They put out a lot of work, and even if much of it was suppressed, thank God we have the Nag Hammadi Library, and thank God the Church Fathers wrote a lot about this.
Well, don't stop on my account. I mean, this
is going like my head's spinning because I'm just looking at my bookshelf. Oh my God, they've got so many, and they're all so psychedelic and weird.
It is psychedelic
because they're all coded. They're very symbolical. They're using metaphors, but they all make sense, and they're using puns. They were very good at puns. They were very good at satire. So it gets very complex with the Gnostics, but when you start untangling them, it's a blast.
Right. I think the important thing to the extent, and this is going to be a primitive thought, because it's that don't get bogged down in the names. Because I know that, when you talk about Dionysus and the Titans, Dionysus, I think, is also Bacchus, and Bacchus gets confused with, Baphomet and horns and goats. But I think in that story, the Titans are probably the bad part of us, and the Dionysus is probably the good part.
The cult of Orpheus, to them, Dionysus was good guy, and Zeus was the ultimate. You know what I mean? It's not the Zeus of the Hellenists and so forth. You have to look at each myth in its own context,
right? Or
names change,
or what the meaning is of it, rather than the name, or maybe create entirely different names and then write the right myth or philosophy. So in Gnosticism, I guess we're talking about 200 years BC, whatever, 300 years, after Christ, the resurrection, the whole thing. Is it that Jesus is the God above the Demiurge? Was he sort of the key? Do I have that entirely wrong? That there is no God above the Demiurge that's going to do anything. We got to take care of it ourselves.
Yeah, I always like to use the analogy, and again, Philip K. Dick does it, because Philip K. Dick was incredibly influenced by Gnosticism. He admitted it. So when you watch any of his movies, whether it's Total Recall or Blade Runner, look at it through a Gnostic vision. But the God above God, or the ultimate consciousness, is pure information. That's it. It's information. It can't do anything with matter, just like matter ultimately can't do anything with information. They're two separate. So its power is information, waking us up to our divine purpose, and so that we may get out of this world and wake others up too. That, like the church itself, the Gnostics certainly argued the nature of Jesus. Was he originally an aeon, an aspect of the Logos, an aspect of the mind of God, just like the Gospel of John says, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was God, Logos meaning the reason of God. Was he a hypostasis? Was he a wise guy that just woke up and said, oh my God, I'm self-actualized like the Buddha? They debated this. There was no doubt. Jesus fascinated the Gnostics, and they went to town with all these weird ideas, but ultimately, again, he's there to wake you. That's how he's going to save you. He's going to give you the rituals and the teachings so that you wake up to be him. The Gnostics were very specific. You saw Jesus, you will become Jesus. The resurrection doesn't happen at the end of time in another. The resurrection must happen in this world. Gospel of Thomas, if you drink from my mouth, you will become like me, and I shall become like you, and you will never taste death. And so Jesus is this representation of our higher selves, the ability for us to wake up, a being, an alien being from above, like David Bowie's The Man Who Fell to Earth, that's coming to wake us up from who we really are. And they were very fascinating. Some of the ideas will kill you. There's like one idea where the Valentinians, which David subscribes to, they were like, well, Jesus was the perfect being, but he was human. Well, yeah, but he was so perfect that he could eat perfectly where he wouldn't have to digest his food and poop. Or he could drink perfectly where he wouldn't have to pee. It was just no sweat. He was a perfectly balanced human being. So they had a lot of ideas, but they didn't care. I mean, if there was some, the Gnostics loved speculating. They were part of the Hellenistic vibe, and speculation was always on the table, always on the menu, boys.
Well, I mean, really nothing has changed except they've become the X-Men or, the Avengers or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, the myths, are a little bit more frivolous and commercialized, but the thoughts are still there. They're just maybe, I don't know, I guess from a greater good perspective, maybe being squandered.
Yeah. I mean, the myths are always the same. Myths is, they come from a primordial place. I forgot who said it. Myth is something that never happened but always is. It's the history behind history. It's that avenue into that rich world of images and symbols that lead us to the archetypes, which are the true building blocks of consciousness. So Jesus is certainly the great history, the great representation, the dying, rising God-man, the reason of God, the noble death. I mean, he brings a lot of these myths together, and the church did that because they wanted a rock star for the religion, and it worked.
But it was also, I mean, there's plenty of the son taking over for the father or the grandfather, but it's usually a bit more violent or after some test of battle. This was a much kinder, gentler usurpation or sharing through the Holy Spirit being a Trinity. And then, I'm sure this is not an original thought, that the church or churches sort of lost their way. They sort of forgot that, wherever there's two of you, I'll be with you. Then, each man is a temple. And, now, we sing the praises of how beautiful and ornate, churches are and this. And I look at them like, this is like millions upon millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars of upkeep a year, and even the new Latter-day Saints. I'm not too far from DC, around the DC Beltway. There's this giant building. I called it Oz for years until someone told me that's the Latter-day Saints. That's their headquarters in DC. I'm like, well, that's not exactly a very modest religion. I mean, it's like, but none are. I mean, well, I shouldn't say none are.
Well, the Egyptians built the pyramids. I think it's fine to build these monuments as long as you're honoring eternity. I think that's the key. All right, and then if you bring in sacred geometry and pointing at the stars and all that, I think it's fine. I mean, the LDS Church is completely Freemason and Kabbalistic in a lot of their theologies, their underlying theology. So I love this sort of, grand architecture and so forth. And again, the ancients did it, the Romans, the Egyptians, but they were honoring the stars and the gods. And pity that, our biggest buildings are what? Banks and stadiums? I think I'd rather have a temple to Artemis or something than that.
Well, I guess there is a point to that. I'm just not sure that the ancients were that much, or weren't using their resources poorly either. It's just that they lasted, and so
they're humans,
we just revere them because they're old, and then we don't quite understand.
We were kinder to nature, though. We were more embedded in nature, so.
Well, sure.
And we were mystical, so.
Well, we didn't invent plastic yet either, so I mean, who knows what would have happened? But again, that's the unknowable. But so that is a ton of information. You said that there was Simon the Magus and the Magdalene. I'm sure that these are all gigantic topics in and of themselves, but where do they sort of fit in this puzzle, in this tapestry?
Well, I mean, as I said, gnosis has to be brought by a Gnostic revealer. We've already talked about Jesus. We talked about Sophia. There were other Gnostic revealers. Again, there's I know the Matrix has one Morpheus, but the Gnostics said there can be many Morpheus. So some of them were Simon Magus. And a lot of these are vilified in the New Testament, but when you look at the Gnostic or other documents of the time, different people. So they were vilified as a way of hiding the truth. So Simon Magus, he's much different than he is in the New Testament. He was a powerful magician. Mary Magdalene, we have a gospel of her. In the Gnostic scripture, she's always the number one apostle to Jesus. She gets everything he says. He even says, "You are the woman who understands the all." In other words, you are the wisest human being in this planet. And there's evidence that there were communities that were following Mary Magdalene. There's other women, too, who founded Gnostic sects, from Salome to Mariam. The Mandeans, who still exist today in Iraq, well, they've been moved to other places of the world, were founded by a woman named Miriam in the 1st century. So you have these various Gnostic revealers. Thomas, doubting Thomas, he has his own gospel, and the Gnostics revered him. So there was these different Gnostic revealers, like, I don't know what you want to call them, hierophants, teachers, head of lodges, if you would, who were all over the place, and they had their groups, and they were teaching these groups these ancient mysteries on how to wake up. And there are many of them, and again, there were many who were vilified in the Bible.
Do you think there have been any, like, say, over the last 1,000 years or so, that we've sort of missed, overlooked, that didn't get their due, or has sort of the world become so messy that it's hard for one voice to get out?
What do you mean they didn't get their due?
I don't know.
Mary Magdalene, obviously.
Well, I mean, but I mean a more recent figure. Mary Magdalene, died whatever, year 60, whatever it was. I mean, someone, from the year 1000 to the year, 2024.
Yeah, it's hard because they keep getting exterminated. Like the Cathars, the Bogomils, Sufis have been persecuted. The Kabbalah kind of gets vilified in Judaism. There were some Persian movements like Mazdakianism, which was very anarchist. In fact, the Persian Empire went anarchist for a while, didn't miss a beat. But when I say anarchism, I mean, you got to call it communism. It's just volunteerism, if you would. But there certainly has been many figures. I mean, in modern times, of course, there was a revival of the Gnostic Church in the 19th century, and many figures have been influenced by Gnosticism, including Crowley, Gurdjieff, many others. We can look at the works of Jacob Boehme, who talked about Sophia and the divine spark. Alchemy came from the Gnostic imagination. The Nag Hammadi library in that area was when all the alchemists were working together. It is no secret that the fathers of alchemy, like Zosimus and Mary the Jewish, were definitely Gnostics. So where there's alchemy and these medieval magicians, there is going to be some Gnosticism there by default. The Rosicrucians and their idea of healing and the dignity of man, some have said, was influenced by Gnosticism. So, yeah, that's a huge topic. I could go for hours on this, how it's the branch.
Let's spend a couple of minutes on Crowley, though, because Crowley is a figure that, listen, when I'm young, I'm listening to the Moody Blues and, Aleister Crowley. Well, sounds psychedelic, then you get older and it's like, no, he was a Satanist. And, so, I mean, hero, goat, somewhere in between. Maybe he's one. Maybe he's someone who isn't getting their due.
Yeah, I mean, now we're getting pretty people are complicated. I don't think he was a Satanist. He was definitely trying to create a new system and move away from old tired systems that were happening in religious circles. So he started this thing called a Gnostic Mass. I think to the field of magic and mythology and spirituality, I think he was a big contributor, huge contributor. Obviously, he was very influential in the 60s, from Led Zeppelin to David Bowie to the Beatles. He was like a counterculture guy. So he was extremely important. Whether you like him or not, that depends on you. I personally, I admire his work. I appreciate what he brought, but Thelema doesn't speak to me at all. I have other systems that just work better for me. But and I know when people will talk about, well, he did horrible things to women and he was a chauvinist and yada yada yada, and we get that. I mean, you brought up Lovecraft, but I have this saying that says, I didn't like him because I knew him. I liked him because he helped me know myself. So I think that's important. In other words, yeah, maybe Crowley affected me, but I wouldn't have dinner with Crowley if he came back, or Lovecraft. Just give me your work, give me your books. That's all I want. So, it's complicated, but don't overthink it. Just they had gifts. People, as Jung said, everybody casts a shadow. Every religion casts a shadow. Everybody's got skeleton in their closets. We all have trauma. Just leave it at that. Take what you need and move on.
Yeah, I think that's a song also. Take what you need and move along or move on. So much here. I'm not sure that I can ask anything that's smart at this point. So is there anything that I really should have asked you? Or like you said in the beginning, you're asking the wrong questions. Are there right questions that you didn't get a chance to address or hit head on that we didn't get to?
No. I think this was a good summary. I mean, obviously, Gnosticism is very popular today. With Jung is more popular than ever. The work of Philip K. Dick. The idea of a simulation theory is now mathematical and scientific, even though the Gnostics were talking about that 2,000 years ago. They were called crazy because simulation, you can talk about it in the East, but in the West, that was like taboo. The idea of Archons can be associated with extraterrestrials, the idea of inner work, levels of reality. So I think a lot of what the Gnostics were warning us about and promises come true here in the year 2024. So tell people, embrace it and embrace the chaos. It's not really chaos. It's something else. It's something we have never experienced before.
So don't be terrified of this great reset that the folks keep telling us about. And there's not going to be some giant dragon war that's going to start somewhere between now and 2029.
Well, as the demons, as Master Eckhart said, if you stop resisting the demons, they turn into angels. Sometimes the demons is just us resisting change and what's on the other side of reality. So embrace the chaos. Go with Hermes, as I say, because we need to change. We are going into a new era, and we're gonna, whether you want to go in kicking and screaming and have your sanity destroyed, or you want to go into a new language, a new form of consciousness, and hopefully a new unity and a more of a global empathy towards our planet and each other and the animals. So
all right.
It's all there. We have the power. We have the divine spark. We can all wake up and be Jesus.
Well, I know that we've only scratched the surface, but I also, as you said earlier on, you need to know yourself. And I know that I don't know enough to ask any more intelligent or pointed questions. But if people want to find out more, actually, I want to ask this first, because you've mentioned a lot of songs on music. So I want to know if you have an outro request. You can ponder that while you're telling everybody where they can find and follow you, some of your works, where they can support you. I know you're an anarchist, but anarchists have to eat. I know you've got a book behind you said coming out called The Occult Elvis. That sounds interesting. Everyone loves the occult. Everyone loves Elvis. And the two together, how could that miss? So where can they find and follow you? What are your works? How can they buy them, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, my website is thegodabovegod.com. Again, Demiurge, Higher God. Or they can just do Miguel Conner, MIGUELCONNER. There's really only one. Or they can type in on the search bar Aeon Byte, my podcast, AEON Byte, BYTE. And you'll go to my page, and I've got everything there. My podcast. I've got intro videos, books, courses. Even have a Gnostic tarot that is doing very well, which has a story of Gnosticism and their different characters, from Sophia to Mary Magdalene to Simon Magus. And there's a lot there. There's a lot, whatever medium you want to go in to learn about Gnosticism, it's all there. So I would send there. And yes, I do have a couple of books on Gnosticism. And yeah, The Occult Elvis is... Did you know that Elvis did read the Gospel of Thomas? He knew of the Gnostics. So,
it doesn't surprise me. I think he's from Memphis. I mean, that's Church Central, right?
Oh, he was far more than a Christian. He was far more than a Christian.
Yeah, well, I was still a baby in the 70s, so I pretty much knew Fat Elvis. My father was the one who knew 50s Elvis.
Right.
So, yeah.
No, my thesis is he's the greatest magician of modernity. So.
That's good. That's good.
And I have the receipts.
Excellent. All right. Perfect. Is there a song? You mentioned John Lennon, The Wheel. We're talking about Elvis being a magician. You mentioned David Bowie, the man who fell to earth. I mean, is there something that you associate with, I don't know, the giant matrix that we have just talked about, and then what sounds like a sub-matrix under the matrix, which is the immediate problem?
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, music is always so personal, and it always depends what day you catch me and what I think is Gnostic. I mean, some days I might think.
Well, let's go with today. Let's go with today.
All right, yeah, Space Oddity by David Bowie.
Okay. There you go. Space Oddity by David Bowie. So Ground Control to Major Tom. That's what you're going to hear next. Miguel Conner, thank you so much. I mean, this was really the beginning of a masterclass, folks. If you want to actually take the masterclass, I guess listen to his podcast. I imagine reading his books will help, and then you'll actually take the masterclass. So that's job of this show is to scratch surfaces and get people interested. But I can't thank you enough. This has been an itch I've been wanting to scratch for a while. I consider it scratched, and as usual, when I scratch an itch, I realized that I have a full-blown rash. There's just so little I know, and so much that now I want to know. But that's part of what this show is for also. So thank you very much. Thanks for doing this on our Saturday night, folks. It is a Saturday night, August 31st, 2024, for those timestamp sensitive. And, check out his show, buy his book. And if you're so kind, give us a rating and a review, and subscribe to Garden of Doom. You get Garden of Doom, Garden Views, and you get GOD Presents the Book of Black, where me and pro wrestler PJ Black talk about Garden of Doom type things with people in and around the wrestling world, which is always fun and interesting. All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you again to our guest, and you'll hear from us later in the week.
Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. 10. Ground control to Major Tom. 8, 7, 6. Commencing countdown, engines on. 3, 2. Check ignition and may God's love be with you. This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know whose shirt you wear. Now it's time to leave the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door, and I'm floating in a most peculiar way, and the stars look very different today. Here am I floating round my tin can, far above the world. Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do. I think my spaceship knows which way to go. Tell my wife I love her very much, she knows. Ground control to Major Tom, your circuit's dead, there's something wrong. Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear? Am I sitting in a tin can, far above the moon? Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I